United National Anti-War Coalition, which is a member organization of the Hands Off Syria Coalition, and that's the website for the Hands Off Syria Coalition. There's some leaflets, there's some literature over there on Syria and other things, including the statement of the Hands Off Syria Coalition, which was kind of like our founding document of what we stand for. I'm also on the coordinating committee of the Hands Off Syria Coalition. We have 4 panelists today. I'll introduce them more fully as I introduce each one to speak. But we have Tarak Kauff from Veterans for Peace. We have Sara Flounders from the International Action Center. Judith Bello from Syria Solidarity Movement, and Bahman Azad from U.S. Peace Council. So we're going to start with Tarak. And Tarak Kauff was a U.S. Army paratrooper for 3.5 years. He's on the Veterans for Peace National Board of Directors. He led veterans delegations to Ferguson, Missouri, Standing Rock, North Dakota, Jeju Island in South Korea, Okinawa, and Palestine. And he is the managing editor of The Peace in Our Times, which is the Veterans for Peace quarterly newspaper, and there's copies of it over there. So we'll start with Tarak.
Good morning, and thanks for coming out. Basically, I'd just like to repeat Veterans for Peace's position on what's going on in Syria. First of all, we're aware that the United States has been, for its entire history, the greatest purveyor of terrorism and war and violence, probably in the history of the world. I actually can't think of any other country that has promoted so much violence and been involved in creating so much violence. And we're aware that what's happening in Syria is part of the mess in the Middle East that colonial powers caused years ago, and that the United States has been deeply involved in. We're also aware that the CIA is very, very powerfully involved in what's going on in Syria. We're aware that we're arming so-called rebel groups, so-called moderate groups, which the moderates, the non-violent people among them, have long since disowned because they've been taken over by violence and violent groups who are waging, war in Syria. Many of these groups are using American-made weapons. We've been bombing Syria for a while, and we're just contributing to the chaos and the misery and the death and destruction that's going on there. So Veterans for Peace is totally opposed to U.S. involvement in that area, except in diplomatic terms. We are demanding that the current idiot in the White House withdraw troops. We have troops in Syria now. We have planes. Withdraw all of our military forces and back out of Syria and engage in diplomacy. We also insist that, let me just say, we're not taking a position one way or the other on whether Bashar Assad's government is good or bad. That's not our business. That's the business of the Syrian people. Meanwhile, it's one of the only secular governments in that area. And we urge our government to recognize that government and deal with them diplomatically. We don't feel that the use of force or violence has or will solve anything. So our position is Veterans for Peace is get the hell out of there. Stop bullshitting the public. Stop trying to convince the public that we are dealing with some horrific agents that we have to stop, that we have no alternative to stopping. People are seeing through that, and we hope that people will continue to see through that lie, because it is very similar to many lies that this country has used to excuse wars of terror that it has waged. So as veterans who have participated in the military, sometimes in wars of aggression, we are totally opposed to this. We want peace, we want diplomacy, we want respect for elected governments, and we do not want to interfere in that conflict over there, regardless of the propaganda that comes out of the government, and regardless of whether Bashar Assad is a nice guy or not a nice guy. Regardless of that, American involvement only makes the situation worse, period, and always has. So that's Veterans for Peace's position.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judith Bello. Judith is a member of the UNAC Administrative Committee. She's representing the Syria Solidarity Movement on the panel. She's a founding member of the Upstate New York Drone Action, which has done some incredible actions, especially at the Hancock Drone Base, which Judy has been involved in. She's visited Syria, I think, on 2 occasions, and she has also visited a number of other countries on peace delegations. This is Judy.
Hi. I wanted to talk a little about some of the myths that the United States uses to manipulate people into supporting this heinous war against the people of Syria. I visited Syria twice. I was an election observer in 2014, and in that particular occasion, I talked to a lot of ordinary people. I spent some time in Tartus, going to different election places and talking to people there. And I had a translator they delegated to me so I could actually freely talk to people. And at the time, one thing that was clear was that people in general really wanted to keep Bashar Assad as their president. For them, he represents security and a future for the country, a stable future on which they can build. So we also had people at that time who went to Sueda and Homs, and they had the same feedback. And in fact, in Beirut, so many Syrian refugees converged to vote in Beirut that they literally shut the city down. So this was really an important, I think, pivotal moment. So to get to the myths, the first is that the Syrian war is a sectarian war. Well, inside Syria, it's not a sectarian war. The fact that Assad is an Alawite and nearly 80% of Sunnis are Muslim, Muslims are Sunni, is more or less irrelevant in this context. Syria's been home to numerous Christian and Muslim splinter groups since the time of Christ. Because those religions had early founding moments there, Christ was born in part of Greater Syria. And the second caliphate was also in Damascus. And all these little fragments of these religions grew up there and stayed, and they're still there. And it's a very stable, ancient, multi-faith fabric in Syria. Journalists who visited there are really amazed, and in like the 2006 or 8 period, a woman named Jean Marie Offenbacher made a film called Tea on the Axis of Evil, where she interviewed all these Syrians about just the fact that they were happy living together and they don't talk about religion in any major way, the same as we don't here. So I thought that was very interesting. This last time I was in Syria, I visited the Grand Mufti. The Grand Mufti, all Sunni, largely Sunni countries have a Grand Mufti, and he's sort of the endowed person there who can make legal judgments within the Islamic faith. And the current Grand Mufti of Syria, Hassan Badreddin Hassoun, says that he thinks that all religions should be able to coexist in peace under a secular government, and that way the religious communities can focus on what's important, which is their faith. The government of Bashar Assad is not an Alawite government. It reflects the demographics of the country. as does the Syrian Arab Army at this point. It's very much just conscripts coming from all over the country, and people at this point who are volunteering to protect their country. The next myth I want to address is the Syrian people rose up against oppression. Syria is a socialist republic. It has in its constitution a mandate to provide for the needs of the people. Government provides free education and medical care, water, electricity, an economic safety net for the poor, including general subsidies for bread and gasoline. The women in Syria have many rights. They're many of them are well educated. There's no political constraints on their activities. There are conservative religious communities in Syria, like there are in this country, that constrain the way women can live. But that is a different element than whether or not it's politically constrained. So you often will see a woman in a hijab and a long dress walking down the street in conversation with a woman in Western style clothes and you know, her hair flowing down her back. It's very common because they don't judge it. It's just the way it is. The next myth I want to address briefly is that Assad is a ruthless dictator. The Syrian people hate him. In fact, when he came to power, he was very, very popular. He was unanimously supported by the parliament and had a large majority of the people supporting him as well. In inheriting Syria, Bashar's trial by fire, Elaborate lists all his actions in the first couple of years of his coming in control of the country. And basically, he freed a gazillion prisoners. He freed a lot of prisoners that nobody knew what had happened to them. Many of them were from the Muslim Brotherhood, a sort of longtime enemy of the Ba'ath Party. He opened up the universities, and he brought in high-tech stuff into the universities and subjects and computer science, internet. He allowed a free press to begin, and a number of periodicals started to arise that were not controlled by the Ba'ath Party. In 2011, while there were opposition rallies that we saw on TV here, in Syria there were also much larger rallies in support of the Syrian government. And which I might add that although they support Bashar Assad, he is not the whole Syrian government. They have a robust bureaucratic government, as much as I've seen anywhere here or in Europe. They have all kinds of people doing all kinds of jobs in that government that are just, supporting the people. In 2012, Bashar Assad met with dissidents from around the country, and anyone who would meet with him, basically. They had the Constitution rewritten to reflect the concerns of the people who were willing to talk to him. And he brought in Ali Haidar, the leader of a longtime left opposition party, into the government as Minister of Reconciliation, and began creating the groundwork for the reconciliation committees they're using now. And reconciliation, it is a hard thing in the middle of a knockdown, drag-out war, because they have to draw the people off who don't want to fight anymore from those who will, who are foreigners or who will fight to the death for whatever they're thinking about. So there's no reason, though, to think that in 2014, Assad was elected by a great majority, as I talked about when I introduced myself. He was very popular because the people want their country back. Another thing that I need to mention is that 2/3 of the Syrian people are still in the government-held areas, including the great majority of the refugees. So everyone wants the protection of having a government. And Assad is more or less the symbol of that government, because this war is a war that's attacking civilization in Syria. So another myth I want to get to quickly is that the war began with peaceful protests. In Daraa, where the war infamously began with a civilian massacre, we're told, it was later noted that more police and soldiers were killed than civilians. A huge stockpile of weapons was found in the central mosque there, and it was guarded by foreign jihadis who had come up from Libya through Jordan. In a town, a border town with Turkey called Jisr al-Shugur, Islamist fighters trained in Turkey sent their families over to a camp where, I might add, they still live across the border in Turkey. And they called for help to the Syrian military, and they, when the soldiers arrived, they killed them all. And what's happening now in Jizr al-Shughur is that it's physically in ruins, and it's inhabited by 200,000 Asian jihadis and their families from Uyghurs and people really from the Far East, and who are looking for a place where they can have an Islamist community, which isn't really welcome in China. No one I met in Syria thought there were moderate rebels. Everyone had a horror story to tell about someone they loved being killed, being threatened, just horror stories that I can't even begin to tell you. People having their food, being denied food and medical access, children being shot in the street for laughing at a bad joke, just women being stripped and flogged in public for not having a hijab on. Just horrific stories that went on. And the one I'm going to repeat to you is Edward Dark, a correspondent from Aleppo, who initially supported the revolution, changed his mind when the jihadis got there in 2013, because they came into the town and they started, besides all the things that I just listed, and being ruthlessly killing Christians and Alawites in the street and so on, they also, they went into the most prosperous district in all of Syria, where all of the factories are and where a lot of the wealth of the country comes from. They dismantled the factories and they shipped all the machinery up to Turkey. And then they burned the buildings and smashed them and bombed them. So they destroyed the one source of wealth in the country. And one of the things that was there actually was the last chlorine factory in Syria, which might throw some light on all of a sudden there are all these chemical attacks with chlorine. So I don't overrun my time here, the last thing I want to talk about is the myth that the U.S. isn't, we're just observing this. We're not really doing this. Shortly after Bashar Assad came to power, George Bush placed Syria on the axis of evil and implemented severe sanctions against Syria, economic sanctions. In 2008, it was documented they were looking for ways to create more dissidents in Syria. In 2010, Ambassador Ford went to Syria and started meeting with all kinds of revolutionaries, including primarily the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a very right-wing religious organization. The U.S. and U.S. allies have supplied weapons and training and political support consistently to militant mercenaries and terrorists in Syria. And they have supplied tons and tons of cash through our allies. And meanwhile, they're enforcing draconian sanctions on the government and the people who actually live in Syria and want to keep their lives. The United States, with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, have waged a relentless propaganda war against the Syrian government through international satellite TV stations. And that impresses the people in Syria as well as outside of Syria, because they hear all these rumors. They hear there's a war on, they hear that democracy and freedom are suddenly going to get better. They hear all kinds of craziness. So while the Western press is screaming Assad must go and the barrel-bound murderer, the Arabic language channels are calling for genocide against Alawites and Christians coming out of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So onto the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood has many immigrants in the U.S., which form the nucleus of the Syrian National Council. These people came here after a violent insurrection in Syria in the 80s that failed. They killed all of the officials in the city of Hama and took over. And so the Syrian army went in a sort of infamous moment and took the city back, also using violence. But at any rate, they came here and they've been waiting. And they are not interested in democracy and freedom, though. This war is about power. It's about power for the Muslim Brotherhood, power for Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They want a right-wing theocratic state governed by laws that were new 1,500 years ago, and men who want power now. Recently, these men have been replaced, first by the most rapacious militias operating in concert with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. They're going to the meetings, and they're being put forward as future rulers of Syria, kind of like the militants and all around. The statement Assad must go is a promise that the U.S. will ensure the ultimate success of this war to undermine the Syrian Republic and destroy the infrastructure of that state. Recent moves by the U.S. to directly occupy parts of eastern Syria with a Kurdish army are evidence that the U.S. is continuing to move forward with this plan, and that they don't change their plans ever, they only change their proxies. So what they have in eastern Syria is a mixture of ISIS and Kurds, through which they hope to govern an occupied territory.
Thank you.
That's the statement.
Our next speaker is Bahman Azad. He is on the executive board and organizational secretary of the U.S. Peace Council. He's the NGO representative to the United Nations from the World Peace Council. He's chair of the Iran Working Group of Veterans for Peace. He's a professor of economics and sociology, and he's on the coordinating committee of the Hands Off Syria Coalition.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you all for coming and making it possible. I would like to divert a little bit from Syria. I think Judy gave you a full picture of what is going on inside and what the agents and activists or actors are on both sides. I want to go a step further beyond that and put it in a context, a broader context. The question is, what is the root cause of this whole tragedy that is going on? And it is not just in Syria, we have seen it in very many different places. And the problem is that our movement, our peace movement, a great part of it, not all of them, of course, not us, have been reactive. They wait until the war starts and they try to protest, without analyzing what is the cause so that they can be preemptive before the next one starts. And the reason for that, in our understanding, in the Peace Council's understanding, is that the U.S. imperialism, and I will use that word although many people hesitate to do that, I think it's important to understand it. It's a key concept in this, that we are not dealing with different administrations, different policies, we are not dealing with different countries, different cases, we are not dealing with different evil leaders all over the place, each one separate from each other. We have been reacting to case by case by case. And the whole thing started, I would say, after the dismantling of the USSR and the drive that started on the part of Western imperialism to take the full control of the globe, especially take over the parts of the globe that was under the influence of the Soviet Union. And that triggered a process that was pretty much formulated by people in the Project for the New American Century in early 1990s, 94 actually, they put out the document. And these people became later on members of the Bush administration and implemented policy, which was based on a document, 90-page document. It's online, you can look at it, Project for the American Century, and look for the rebuilding America's defenses for the 21st century, or for the current century. And they outline over there in that document exactly what has been going on. That is before 2000, exactly what has been going on ever since. And I want to go over some of these terms before I get to my discussion about what I'm focusing on. I'm quoting here. I have extracted a few paragraphs out of the 90-page document. It starts by saying that the United States must shape a new century favorable to American interests. That's the assumption. At present, the United States forces faces no global rival. Therefore, there are, however, potentially powerful states dissatisfied with the current situation and eager to change it. our defense strategy must be maintaining US preeminence, precluding the rise of a great power rival. And we know they specifically mentioned China as that emerging rival. Today, the military's task is to expand the zone of democratic peace, military expanding the zone of democratic peace, to deter the rise of a new great power competitor. On the basis of that, they advocate the dispatching of concentrating US naval forces around China, East Asia. And they are starting doing that. They have done that already. It is, another side of it, it is important that NATO not be replaced by European Union, leaving United States without a voice in the European security affairs, which involves this whole new Ukraine issue and everything else that was another source of conflict. It is now commonly understood that there are forces that may threaten America's ability to exercise its dominant military power. Potential rivals such as China are anxious to exploit the situation, while adversaries like Iran, Iraq, and North Korea are rushing to develop ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons as a deterrent to American intervention in the region. They're not being aggressive. They themselves concede that these are defensive mechanisms being created to deter US from intervention. Okay? If an American peace is to be maintained and expanded, it must have a secure foundation on unquestioned US military preeminence. Okay. Then they go on to list some of these countries that are really in the crosshairs for putting them down or dividing them or subduing them. And I mentioned North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. And if you remember Wesley Clark, the former member, head of NATO, commander of NATO, mentioned several countries that were on the list. These are the objectives. That is for total domination and US hegemony over the whole globe. And this is why it's going on. But the way they present it, they have put it in the context of a humanitarian imperialist strategy, that they are going there to save people from dictators, from violations of human rights, to support women and liberate women as they did in Afghanistan, and all kind of causes like this. And who are the people who are doing this to these innocent people? Are these demonic leaders? So if you go through the whole situation since the collapse of the Soviet Union up to the present, you will see that each one of them will justify the invasions, attacks, military interference were all justified in the name of an evil or bad dictator or a bad guy. Yugoslavia, Milosevic; Panama, Noriega; Afghanistan, the Taliban; Iran, the Ayatollah; Iraq, Saddam Hussein; Libya, Gaddafi; Syria, Assad; Venezuela, Chavez, and now Maduro; Ukraine, Yanukovych; Russia, Putin now, right? Demonization is going on and on. And this is always the main justification for implementing this general strategy, that is the total domination, and stopping any rival from emerging after the Soviet Union was gone. Now, there is two parts to this whole demonization strategy. One is to distract people and present it as something good, right? When you invade another country in the name of bringing down a kind of a brutal dictator, you look good. So it doesn't become an issue for the public. That demonization also pacifies the peace movement. Because we have heard in Syria, when we've been opposing Syrian intervention, many of the even very prominent peace organizations in the US are talking about both sides are bad, we cannot take sides. That is because that whole imperialist context is missing. They look at each case individually, and they are taken by the propaganda, demonization propaganda, that it was in 1975 when I was a student, and Mike Wallace in a 60-minute program at that time mentioned that we can create enemy number one of any country's leader in 2 weeks. We have reached that level of media technology that we can do it. Before we invaded Iraq, many people didn't know where Iraq was, we didn't know who Saddam Hussein was, right? And many of these leaders, a month or 2 months prior to the attack, people didn't know who they were, right? But in 2 months, they are the enemy number one, depending on who's on the agenda, right? So what they do, they pacify through this, the peace movement. We have heard this about Syria more commonly. Both sides are bad. Assad is brutal, and we don't support the State Department, so we're sitting on the fence doing nothing. That's one side of it. The second side is probably more sinister, and that is this demonization is actually masking the fact that all these attacks are linked, part and parcel of the same imperialist strategy. By focusing on the leader as if it's just this particular leader the cause of this invasion, that particular leader as the cause of the other invasion, right? They distract people from the scheme that is guiding and driving the whole thing. And they're taking them one by one and according to a given plan that they themselves have already outlined. And this has been going on. And this is what is going on right now. Okay? And I think this is what a great weakness in our peace movement, that it does not recognize the imperialist context of this that is going on. And they are going against aggression, but not against imperialism. Because when you go against aggression, they're dealing with each case of aggression separately, right? Unless you see that it's done for the same purpose everywhere. And it's the same force, with the same intentions that they're doing it. So we should really focus on bringing the whole anti-imperialist orientation to our peace movement. Because unless we do that, we will not be able to counter what is going on and prevent the future ones that are coming. And we think they are coming. I mean, they are getting involved in Venezuela right now. They're trying to bring that going. Yeah. That was my 2 cents about this.
Good 2 cents. Thank you. Our last but not least speaker is Sara Flounders. Sara is the coordinator of the International Action Center. She's a member of the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. She's a member of the Coordinating Committee of the Hands Off Syria Coalition. She has been on a number of trips to Syria. She's the author of several books and pamphlets. Sara.
Thanks so much, and I'm really glad to participate in this program today, this panel of Hands Off Syria. As Joe said, I've traveled to Syria in delegations to bring others, to report back, to make videos during the war. And in an earlier time when there were major international Palestine conferences in Syria, you could see a very different view of what Syria was as a modern secular state, so much linked to the region and to the world. So before 2011, you would have seen a totally different and secular progressive state than what you see today, where a third of the population are displaced, are refugees. And yet overwhelmingly, it is the government in Syria that is providing for people. Every single school, every community building, a room like this classroom will house a family or 2 families. And yet there aren't homeless people in the streets, with a third of the population displaced. So you see 2 very different views of Syria. And I want to say the importance, to pick up on points that Tarak and Judy made, of international delegations. I've helped to organize delegations in Palestine, Iraq, Iran, Colombia, South Korea, is to take a group of people from different directions to see a country and report back to their milieus, to their both church and political groups and schools. It's a very important part of building and sustaining a movement against U.S. wars. Now, it always raises the question of how does the anti-war movement respond in a period of endless U.S. wars? I mean, this is a problem, because to oppose U.S. wars, you have to explain them in the most concrete ways. At the same time, you have to know that the corporate media won't give you a line of coverage. Their role is to support every one of these wars and do so through constant confusion and obstruction, just piling it on with demonization and horror stories. It's also a different period than earlier, let's say, thinking back to the Vietnam War, where there was a big divide even within the U.S. ruling class, within U.S. power. And part of their fighting it out was to give great publicity to the movement, because a strong part of them felt the war was unwinnable. And in fact, that was true, given the level of resistance of the Vietnamese people. But today, this is a period of, in the U.S. empire, of complete rot and decay. None of their wars are succeeding. They say it's a unipolar world. They're the only power. They decide. And yet, here we are, 16 years into a war in Afghanistan, longest war, with no end in sight. They received none of the gains they thought were a sure thing in Iraq or in Libya, and they have been completely unsuccessful so far in Syria. And so we want to address a great deal of that war today. But we know that U.S. wars create massive destruction, both against a targeted country and in the entire region. And that needs to be addressed also. So it's a different period where the U.S. empire, what do they have to offer any country in the world? Weapons sales. That's it, really. How many billions of dollars will Saudi Arabia buy? $350 billion in weapons over the next 10 years? Will it reach $1 trillion? I mean, really, it's quite incredible. They can offer also U.S. bases. And they can offer massive destruction, assassinations, coups, sabotage, interference in the elections of every country, while screaming about that there's interference here. So they have nothing to offer, and this is a real problem for the U.S. empire. They also have nothing to offer here, except an assurance that everything from Social Security and pensions and health care and schools will be cut further and further to sustain these wars. So we're in a period where we have to address all the wars and yet address and give information on each of the wars. But the anti-war movement now does need a view of U.S. imperialism, of the U.S. empire, and the empire in this period, a different period. They are contracting. In economic terms, a second-rate power with a first-rate nuclear weapons, a military machine larger than the whole world combined, and a constant threat to use it. They sail their aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, hold war games off the coast from Korea and China to the very borders of Ukraine. So the Hands Off Syria coalition was an effort to take this enormous manufactured confusion, because it doesn't happen accidentally, and hammer out a statement, a unified statement, and pull out a few facts that were so obvious. We passed this out earlier, this Hands Off Syria statement. It's available online, but it has thousands of signers around the world, and organizational signers. It helped to generate a debate in many, many organizations. Would they sign this? What did it mean? Were they in agreement? And have a basic agreement on a few facts on Syria and a few demands on Syria. And actually, it's a very good template for other building opposition to other U.S. wars. So I want to raise it from that perspective, because sometimes we have to think how we handle building unity among many different forces. So, as I say, we hammered out a few facts that were so obvious that this is a U.S. orchestrated intervention. That was number one. That it's a U.S. demand of regime change. The government must resign. That the sanctions have destabilized not only Syria, but the entire region. It puts the whole region in a complete lockdown, creating enormous hardship. Another obvious fact, guaranteed even in the UN Charter, the government of Syria has a right to call on other countries and forces for assistance against an outside intervention. And maybe most important, it's so obvious, but it's not our business to decide the government of Syria, to decide for or against Assad. I mean, imagine saying that to the movement at large. This is the business of the people of Syria. Now, there can be different views on the government, to praise it, in opposition, feel it could go further, do more, do less, and even on this panel, and within the signers of Hands Off Syria. But we all agree on one point: it's not our business. It's the business of the people of Syria. So that was sort of the basic points of unity that we came up with. And then we came up with 4 basic demands. End regime change. End all foreign aggression and the arming and the funding. End all the military and financial and logistical intervention. And end the sanctions. And then to also say the most obvious, that we need jobs and health care and education and an end to racist police here in the U.S. and not wars and violence abroad. So that was the basis of the Hands Off Syria statement. But as I say, this could be a template for other struggles. Hands off Venezuela. Hands off the Ukraine. NATO out. Hands off Cuba and the blockade. And we could go on and on. Now, I also want to salute the many different kinds of actions, because very often those who are for the war or don't want to be pushed to take a stand say, well, there just aren't enough people in the streets. You haven't done enough to capture my attention. My time is almost up, so let me sort of end on these points. That in the past 6 years, in terms of the war in Syria, earlier the war in Libya, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, not only delegations organized, but constantly forums, videos, meetings, coordinated forums across the country, coordinated demonstrations again and again. Sometimes we say, well, we think we can pull this off in 25 cities. Be at least a picket line. Other times we've had up to 100 cities where there is a coordinated action. When the U.S. Congress was actually going to vote on U.S. intervention, if you remember, it was in 2014 or 2015, there were militant delegations that went to every single congressional office in the country and said, no, don't you dare. Now, every one of these coordinated actions show what's possible. Final point is that we're up against, and have been from the very beginning, an enormous number of funded non-governmental organizations and media, including what's called alternative media, whose role is simply to sow confusion, distrust, and to give the soft line of the U.S. State Department. And this is true whether we're talking about Amnesty International reports, Human Rights Watch, Democracy Now!, the Bernie Sanders campaign, whether it's Republican or Democrat, it's Trump, Clinton, or Sanders. They all agreed that the U.S. war in Syria was entirely legitimate. And anyone who didn't agree was somehow out of touch with reality. So we're up against a lot, even right here at Left Forum, where overwhelmingly there can be forces who are absolutely for the war and for giving every possible reason and excuse. So we have an alliance, the U.S. has an alliance of the most reactionary forces, and they're also backed up by all those who say resistance is impossible. And we have to really band together in new ways, find constant ways, and this one campaign, the Hands Off Syria campaign, was a way of impacting many organizations. I would encourage everyone here to go to the website of Hands Off Syria Coalition, sign that, send it out to others, and see if it can be the basis of having united kinds of actions, and actions which educate people on what the U.S. empire is today, in this period of extreme decline and yet extreme ruthlessness, that our strength and our unity, our solidarity with people who are under attack around the world, we can be a material force if we understand what we're about, and we do so, and we act in a very conscious way. So,
One point of information.
Point of information.
I would like to also add to Sarah's information that the coalition fully supports Tulsi Gabbard's from Hawaii. Her bill at the Congress, HR 608, which is calling for cutting all support by the U.S. government for all terrorists everywhere, including Syria. We have been trying to mobilize in support of that bill. There is a website, hr608.info, where people can go and sign the petition in support of Gabbard's bill. And that petition automatically emails the petition, signed petition, your copy of it, to 60 members of Congress who are on the Intelligence Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee. So it would be very helpful if you could take a minute and go on that site, hr608.info, and sign the petition. And go to members of Congress who are considering the bill. We are certain that in those committees, the bill is going to be silenced and kept there on the table, because we want them to vote yes on it. So it would help a lot. Thanks.
Did you have something to add to that, Tarak?
Not that I particular, but I will say that Veterans for Peace definitely supports that bill, and we support Chelsea, what she's calling for. And she's a lone wolf out there, you know. So
she's also a veteran.
What?
She's also
a veteran.
Of Iraq.
Yeah. I mean, we're not in total agreement with her and everything, but on these points we are in agreement. I did get the paper for another reason. But I want to thank you guys for your presentation. It was really, you added so much information, it was so important. I did want to say about the anti-war movement in particular, about building it and unifying it. One of the reasons that Veterans for Peace, and I think we've all realized this, that the anti-war movement specifically in the States has dwindled, is because there's so many other issues that people are struggling with. People are struggling with the oppression against black people, against immigrants, the environmental destruction that's going on, the pipeline. So there's all these different issues. Well, what Veterans for Peace is doing, and what a number of people are doing, is connecting it, because we see that what's going on here, the violence, and this is all of this is violence, the violence that has been in this country since the inception of the country, right? With the genocidal war on Native Americans, is now exported. It doesn't come from nowhere. If I'm not a violent person, I'm not going to walk out of my house and be violent. If I'm violent inside, I'm going to be violent outside. So we see that it's all connected. So what we're trying to do now is to make these connections very, very prominent, to show how that There is no global warming without the might of the military, without the backup of armed and militarized police, National Guard, etc., private contractors who use violence. There's no such thing as, you couldn't have that. You couldn't have the oppression in the black community without militarized police, without these things. So everything comes back and is connected to this massive organized violence, which we call U.S. military, and all the effects that it has, all the weaponry. So I got the paper because we came up with 10 demands. We just had a big rally in Washington, D.C., then a march to the White House, then more at the White House. And we had 10 demands, which, you know, Veterans for Peace is an anti-war organization. I mean, our principle is end war, because we think the war, period, is bad. But we realized some years ago that war is not just what's going on in Vietnam or what's going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Syria. That's not the only definition of war. Black people know war. Immigrants know war. Refugees know war. I mean, these are all aspects of war, organized violence. So we want people to get it, that these things are all connected. Then we can come together, then we can have a powerful movement, and this is part of it. You know, the Hands Off Syria is definitely a part of it, and I totally agree with this program. I'm just going to take one more second I wrote these, most of these demands with a little bit of help, but they're in the paper, and I want you to just think about for a minute how all of this is connected to this. It's connected, directly connected. So our first demand was, and you'll love this, dismantle the U.S. empire at home and abroad, because we are an occupied country. You know, we think, well, we walk around, we have freedom. No, not really. Freedom is having a say in what your community is doing, and we don't have that. You know, so that's number one. Number two is close all U.S. bases on foreign soil, bring the troops home. That would go a long way to alleviating all these problems. 3, ban nuclear weapons. 4, redirect the Pentagon budget, money for education, healthcare, infrastructure, and sustainable green energy, the environment. 5, dismantle corporate control of our government. We see how the corporations are totally interfaced with the military, totally. 6, dismantle the school-to-prison military pipeline. 7, stop persecution of migrants, immigrants, and refugees. 8, end sexism and gender discrimination in the military. 9, respect and honor First Nation sovereignty and treaties. 10, end racism and racist violence. So all of those things connect with people that are struggling for what we were calling other issues. There's not any more other issues. They're all the same issue. They're all connected, and they're connected with this. And if we can connect with people on that level, then I think we're going to build a stronger anti-war and anti-imperialist movement, because that's what we're dealing with.
Can we go into a general discussion
Yeah,
rather than
yes.
keep on
Yes.
going? So hang on for 1 second. So let me just say also that Jerry Condon from Veterans for Peace is on the coordinating committee of Hands Off Syria. And also want to just put in a plug for the UNAC conference, which is called End the Wars at Home and Abroad. And that's basically the same program which Tarak just laid out. And I also want to mention that I have a list here. If you want to get your email on the email list for Hands Off Syria Coalition, please come up and give me your email. So this is an issue, Syria, that has divided the left, divided the anti-war movement. It's been a very powerful discussion in some sense. You heard what people said here. We will be accused, and Hands Off Syria Coalition is continually being accused as being pro-Assad. That is what we get accused of. You heard what we have said here, that our focus and the title of this is U.S. intervention, and leaving the aspect of what government people have to the people in that country. That's called self-determination. We support the right of self-determination. So this has engendered a lot of discussion. Let's see where it goes from here. If you have a question or discussion, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, call on a bunch, get a bunch of questions and discussion, and then we'll let the folks on the panel answer. I see one person here, 2 and 3. Let's start with that. And then 4 back there.
Well, I'm just curious, you always hear about, American interests. They always say it's about American interests. What exactly are the American interests? Corporate interests or globalization? I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, this man here was next.
Yeah. I have an important question, please. Why is it very much, like Sarah pointed out, I mean, I can relate how Syria, and this is a fact that was beautiful before 2011, before the Zionist-backed rebels came in and wreaked havoc over there and killed millions of people. Why is it that the Muslim organizations, or so-called Muslim organizations, seem to support those rebels who have wreaked havoc over there? Of course, I know why the Jewish, or so-called Jewish Israel lobby supports it, but the Muslim organization, I mean, just like I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, I'm called the self-hating Jew, but these folks aren't called self-hating Muslims. I mean, I get just like AIPAC doesn't speak for Jews, so to the Muslim organizations in Saudi Arabia don't speak for Muslims. Can someone elaborate on that?
Okay. Now, I feel one of you was the next person, yes?
Yeah. Just to address the issue, it's not as much a question as of the takeover of Amnesty International and the brainwashing of what used to be potentially anti-war groups that have now been co-opted, basically. One of my issues is cultural, and I think it goes way back to the end of World War II. And it's a very specific objective of the U.S. to take over all forms of thought, including culture, and that it's been done. They've taken over the arts. They've denuded the thinking. I don't think we have an anti-war movement. I remember the anti-war movement from the 60s and 70s. It disappeared. Not completely, but so that's an issue for me, is the invasion of the body snatchers kind of issue with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and people. Nobody talks about the wars. I don't hear people. I mean, a la Bernie Sanders talks about free education and health care, but he never linked it up. So anyway, I think it goes back to World War II, the end of World War II, and the purposeful objective of taking over all forms of thinking culturally.
Thank you. Man back there.
Yeah, thank you to all the panelists. I just have one comment. About 2 years ago, New York City was host to a photography exhibit in Chelsea. It was a photography exhibit called Ukraine, Syria, What's Next. I don't know if anyone got to see that, but it showcased before and after scenes of cities like Damascus, like Aleppo, and you could really see how secular the society was. So I think that was very important for those who visited, and it brought a lot of awareness. So I want to know how can we support those type of projects, because for the American public at large, it's so hard to get footage from the ground, to get reporting from the ground. We have to see RT, Al Jazeera, Telesur, aside from also joining your organizations and signing petitions, but how do we get the American public at large to support these projects and just bring greater awareness to the theme of imperialism that Bahman mentioned, which is so important and critical in this issue?
Thank you. Why don't we just go down the line and answer whatever you want to from the whole take that people gave, and then we'll do a second round after that.
Can you reiterate the questions real quick? Because I think you
All
wrote
right.
it down.
The first one was, what are U.S. interests? That we all hear U.S. interests in this region or this region. The second one was I don't know if I got down everything, but points that stuck out to me. People said, why do so many Muslim organizations seem to support the rebels? And the third one is about changing the consciousness and intervening into the consciousness of people through Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the arts, etc. Ukraine and other places showing the secularness of these cities before, and how can we get involved in more projects like that.
And maybe each of us could keep our comments to less than 5 minutes. You would time us.
I will time
So we
you.
have time for a second round of
Okay.
questions and comments.
Okay, go on.
Anybody who wants to go first, or you want to go in order?
Just go down the line.
Well, we'll go down the line this way, then we'll go down the line that way.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to be duplicating each other, I see.
It's okay.
Well,
Really try not to.
In terms of what are national interests, well, what they present as our national interests are not the same things as our real national interests. So they try to present their interests as the national interests. As they used to say before, what's good for GM is good for America. That's the same attitude, especially the more class divide deepens, the less possible to define a national interest along something that everybody agrees on. Because one way or another, any of the policies that we are, main ones that we are involved in, any of the policies that the government or the establishment tries to adopt, there's no way it can satisfy everybody. It's going to benefit some group and hurt some other group. And there's no way you can come up with a national interest issue on that. Even though the issue of terrorism, that everybody thinks that it's in our national interest to fight it, right? We are promoting. There are people who are promoting this terrorism abroad, right? And in the United States. We are taking side, we are selling $300 billion worth of weapons to a country that is the source of a lot of terrorism in the world, right? Look what they're doing in Yemen right now. Look what they did to Bahrain, right? And we are selling them all these weapons, right? So we are promoting that, and it's in the interest of the same, what Eisenhower called military-industrial complex, or I would say military-industrial security establishment complex that is going on, that benefits from it, and the rest of people pay for it. So our national interest really is to go against the whole network that has taken over and remove them and reorient the whole system towards something that serves everybody. I think that would be our, that should be an end of imperialism probably. I'm hung up on this one. We have to call for an end to U.S. imperialism. That is our national interest. Brings all of us together against a small minority. I'm not sure what Muslim organizations you're referring to, whether it's in the United States you're talking about, globally you're talking about?
CARE.
Which ones?
CARE.
Care.
Yeah.
Money.
But
Yeah,
we-
there
What's the
are.
Brotherhood?
Everybody doesn't have to answer every question.
you know,
5 minutes.
I think
We
Muslim,
got 2 more minutes.
Muslim people are in a bind in this country, right? The same way some people come at, I remember the ones who are opposed to Assad say, oh, go to refugee camps and everybody is talking against Assad. And I tell them, to get to that refugee camp, they should prove that they are not pro-Assad, right? Either they are really not one, or they are hiding that they are pro-Assad because they cannot say otherwise. They are waiting to get visas to come to the United States. You expect them to say that they are pro-Assad, right? The same case happens with regard to a lot of Muslims here. This is the policy of the United States. You don't want to go against it. You're going to get in trouble. U.S. is supporting the rebels, right? What are you going to do as a Muslim group here, right? To say that you're for Assad, you're going to be in big trouble, right? So they have to either be silent or take a kind of a diplomatic position on things that, I'm not talking about any particular organization, I'm talking about the general bind that the Muslims have. You know, every time somebody does something, they have to be the first one to come out and condemn, right? This is the situation they're in. As for the rest of them, I'm not an expert,
Okay.
so I'll leave it.
So let's go down. Tarak, you're next.
It's great. I found the questions really related. I I want to respond to your question because I think it's very important because it involves something that's actually been going on earlier than the end of World War II. Got into high gear. I mean, it basically started with
CIA.
Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, right? Who taught, he realized that it was possible to manipulate public thinking. And we have, this country has become absolutely, you gotta give credit where credit is due, absolutely masterful about it. So when people talk to me about educating the public, and I understand that, you know, and exposing the causes and costs of war and imperialism and so forth like that, wow, you're up against it. We got little voice, you know. They have the organs, you know, the media, the corporate media, the TV, the entertainment industry are all pushing out this this propaganda, this mind control, this mind-numbing stuff, brain-deadening things. And most of the public, a good part of the public, has in some way, shape, or form bought into that American myth, you know, the noble cause myth, you know what that is? That everything that we do is for the good, and they deal with the wars, like you were saying, an individual basis. We have to go over there to fight for freedom. You know, it's bullshit. We see through it. There are some of us who have become immune to that propaganda, which is mainlining the American public. So I don't depend on the American public, really, because they have been too influenced. I'm not blaming them. I'm not critical of them. It's a disease.
Right.
You know, they've been too influenced by this massive, massive propaganda thing, and it is, and it's in high gear now. No country, not Nazi Germany, not Stalinist Russia, has ever had anything as sophisticated as this. What I do depend upon is the choir, building the choir. You notice that little thing, the spectrum of allies, you know, who you talk to, who you can influence, right? I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you should be. It's really simple. But I feel we have to work on building the choir from the inside out, strengthening it. We need to increase our commitment, our willingness to make sacrifices, our willingness to put ourselves on the line, not just to discuss the issues intellectually and hope that we're going to convince the public and wait for the public to come and support us. No, you've got to lead. The choir has to lead in this thing. I'm losing myself here, but that's a big issue, and that affects everything. That propaganda that's going on. And we have to do what we can to stand up for truth, for justice, for human rights. That's what we have to do in every case. You know, I don't know how it's going to turn out. This country's on a destructive path that's unsustainable because the national interest has always been the interest of the few and the powerful. It started out that way. These people were slaveholders. They were rich, white slaveholders. They orchestrated this stuff. We got to make it look good. They were very brilliant. You know, it wasn't a democracy back then. It has never been a democracy. Get real. You know, it has never been a democracy. I don't even want to talk about Israel because if I get started on Israel, I'm really going to go off the edge. Okay? But, you know, they're both in it together. So the national interest of this country has always been unsustainable. This is an unsustainable national interest when you are concerned with power, profit, expansion, capitalism. You know, these things are all unsustainable. I don't know if we can stop it at this point. We're headed off a cliff in many ways. I do know that it's up to each one of us to stand for truth, to stand for justice, to stand for human rights, and to do whatever we can at whatever cost it is to us as individuals. We have to stand together. We have to band together. I don't have any grand plan of how to, you know, build a mass movement. I'm interested in Veterans for Peace. I'm interested in people who are dedicated, who are willing to sacrifice. I'm interested in the choir, building a powerful, powerful choir that will do whatever is necessary to stand up for these things. You know, I guess that's my 2 cents.
Sarah.
Cards at the top, both of these, really excellent. The corporate media is really linked to the military industries and to the banks. And their role is to promote and justify and raise up the views of U.S. power. And their role is also to marginalize and make all forms of resistance seem irrelevant. They're just not on the agenda. I mean, just think of the past period where you had tens of thousands of people who camped for months at Standing Rock. I mean, that was incredible. When I went, it was like there was no end, and under the most difficult conditions. You had tens of thousands of people in the streets in the Black Lives Matter movement. Incredible, shut down cities, highways, and yet almost not reported, and 0 cops who have served time for point-blank range killings. The media won't tell you these things. You get a little tiny piece. There's tens of thousands of people who have acted in defense of immigrants. People who, just in Portland last week, 3 people actually, to stand up, that's kind of incredible. But also when you look at the actions around the airports and so many other actions, you have a reactionary, completely reactionary government and all kinds of resistance, but you won't see it in the media. So if you're looking for it in the media, you will be disappointed and you will think yourself to be irrelevant. It doesn't mean you are. It really doesn't mean you are. We are having a bigger impact than I think we take credit for sometimes, and which is seen much more around the world. There's international coverage of our actions and coverage in social media. Now, this is also a time where, in recent polls, less than 25% of the population in the U.S. believes the media. That's kind of interesting. And is more interested among the younger generation in creating their own media. Now, there's a certain buy-in to some of the lies, but we have more opportunities today, and I think we really have to look at what we're capable of and what we're doing and not see ourselves, resist it. It's like looking at yourself in the mirror of a fun house, where everything is all distorted. That's the role of the media, to glorify their power, including, let's say, Saudi Arabia. Now the U.S. is in an alliance at the hip with Saudi Arabia. It's like a huge suction pump to take the money, the vast sums of money, just turn it into weapons sales. You have 25% of the population of Saudi Arabia living in extreme poverty, and a completely, I won't even go into no women's rights, no rights for anyone, and yet there is a real all-out effort to fund Muslim organizations that have a completely reactionary program and that seem to speak for the Muslim world. And that, again, is not true, because this has been 60 years of enormous resistance to U.S. imperialism coming from throughout the Arab and Muslim world. So it's an effort to cover and paper that over using enormous wealth and privilege. And that privilege is becoming narrower and narrower. When they say today that 60 billionaires own more than half the world, and I think that's even shrunk to, it was 200 and then it was 60. I think the latest figures are even smaller. But the concentration of extreme wealth and the greatest poverty in human history, it's unsustainable. So we have to know that and know our own capacity for change, and know that the corporate media exists to lie, and they have sucked in, it's very true, the point of it's a takeover of all forms of thought. So that's the role of Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, is through enormous corporate funding. They may have 10,000 projects that local people do, and then a few projects that get all the media coverage, which will be used to justify war, to thank NATO for intervention in Afghanistan and to justify Syria and so on. And a lot of, okay, my time is up, so I'll pass it.
Yes, more hard acts to follow. I guess just frame it in my own mindset. But one thing I study to some degree is just the kinds of effects the media has on people. For one thing, it builds fear. So people are hemmed in between fear and ignorance. And they're actually, I think in many cases, afraid to know. Because if they know, they can't turn away from it. Once you know, you can't not know. You can't say, oh, gee, I just saw this mass slaughter and I think I'm going to forget about it. No, once you actually let yourself see it, you're stuck. And you have to resist. And people don't, they don't want to give in to that because it's frightening. It's like take the red pill in the Matrix. Once you do that, the world looks a lot crummier than it did before. But people are desperately struggling to hold on to their illusions right now. And I think that this is going to continue to crumble because of that. I also think that these Muslims, again, Muslims even more so, as Bahman said, they are afraid. They're afraid to voice any support for something against America. Even some of the really strong activists I know are often they don't talk about Syria, for one thing, because it's just too hot to handle. And at the same time, the United States is promoting it as a bullhorn, promoting Saudi values, promoting of all things, if you can even call them values. Well, they are values, but they're not very moral by our standards. But this is, and it's done not only here, but it's done in the world at large. So that, the Saudis with U.S. support are building schools. This is something they're very upset about in Syria, actually, the government and the people who are part of civil society. They're the business leaders I met, the Grand Mufti, when I talked to him. All these people are horrified because what happens is Saudi Arabia comes and they dumps a whole lot of money into these mosques in poorer sections of the country. And that money goes to teaching people, teaching children, but teaching people in general that the way to be well is through this narrow view of the world. And that's how you create the sectarian view. And they did it in Afghanistan. It was well known. And my friend from Pakistan actually had, she was the first person who showed a picture of the Taliban textbooks that were made and that were published by the University of Nevada. And this is, this is how you know the United States permeates this whole thing. Because sure, we get the Saudis to spend the money, we give it to them to spend, so it won't be our responsibility, and this is the whole game. And I always come to think in my mind that this is similar to the Native Americans, to the conquest of the Native Americans in this country, because they got the tribes that were willing to fight alongside them, to be their proxies in wars against the tribes that weren't. And then, when there was no one left, they took them out because there was no one else to defend them. And I think we have to really watch this. And I just want to spend 1 minute on the gentleman in the back corner's point. I love projects like this. I honestly, I don't know how powerful, but I think it's a basic part of education. It's like Tea and the Axis of Evil, the film I cited. And there's more stuff like that out there. The question is, how do we promote it? And these are the things, we can promote them through the Unitarian churches and the Presbyterians, and we can promote them through the all kinds of venues that don't want to hear our politics. And I think we do need to be doing that. And one of the most important things, I've been to Iran, Pakistan, I've talked to people in Waziristan, about how, and you know what they did? They were standing in front of us chanting, "We want peace, we want peace," in Waziristan. Is that what we hear about Waziristan? No. And so we have this information, and we need to send more people over, because everyone who goes gets radicalized. And we need to make sure that there's youth among the people who go, because a lot of times us old people happen to have a little bit of money left and we're retired, and we say, oh well, so we can do that. But we need to get the young people over there as well and see what's really happening in these places, because it's so impressive. and you go away and you never believe the lies again. Once you've been to Iran and see what they're building, to see that their military, yes, they have conscripts. At 18, everybody has to go in the military unless they're in college. Does this sound familiar to us Vietnam-era people? But you know what? While they're there doing their 2 years, they work as firemen, they work as security guards, they work in all ever. Now the U.S. has never come, and so this gives them a peace mission. And so the money isn't all being dumped into war. They're actually thinking about peace. So I really think that we should learn more from these countries, and it's very hard. I tried to talk about, they're all into about reconciliation and I forget what it's called, but working with people to have private solutions for violence and so on. And but you can't talk to them about the Middle East where they've been doing it forever. In fact, the very name for it is a pejorative. It's dia. And blood money. Horrible thing. But they actually have special courts where people can sit down and have a powwow and decide how to resolve the problem. What do you really want most to end the violence so that you won't be mad anymore? And usually it's not seeing that person executed, it's something else. So I think we could learn from them if you watch the films that have been winning in Hollywood. This is a very weird thing. They've been winning Best Foreign Film by the same director. And these films always center on that private negotiation in Iranian courts where people come and they actually tell the truth. You don't tell the truth to the authorities. You tell it to one another. So I want us to learn more from them. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go around with the second round. Just let me say, the guy in the back with the photographs. UNAC did sponsor a national tour of photographs of Ukraine on what happened at the House of Labor, trade unions, and the rise of fascism that's going there. And we would love to do more projects like that. If you want to do those kinds of projects, I urge you to get involved with UNAC and help us do that. Okay, I have one, because this man's been working, he should be on the thing. 2, 3, 4, and 5. And please try to keep it, I'm sorry. And please try to keep it short. So, and then questions will be short. We said 5 minutes before, we'll go for 2 this time. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that the United States is such a failure in its goals in the Middle East. I think one of our goals is to break up these countries. Like maybe you've heard of the Yidan plan. It's to create a lot of, break up Syria into pieces, break up Iraq into pieces. That's what we want to do. In Afghanistan, they have poppies, and we want to sell dope. I've heard this, and so the taxpayer pays for the war, and the dope dealers, whoever they are, CIA is involved. They get the dope money. Also, they have tons of lithium. I think we'll be in Afghanistan for the next 100 years until they run out of all these things. If it ever happens. So I don't know. I'd like you to respond. Are we such a failure if you could consider the goals of the 1%?
Yes.
I belong to Peace Action, and a couple years ago I marched in the Veterans Day Parade with Vets for Peace. And we were a small contingent, and there was a group of women from Pax Christi and Long Island also. I'm not a vet, but I marched for my father, who was in World War II. And I thought people on the sidewalk and in the viewing stand would jeer us because we had anti-war signs and we were chanting anti-war slogans, and behind us were tanks and little Boy Scouts singing from the halls of Montezuma. So it was very militaristic, except for our group. But people on the sidewalk and the viewing stand, they clapped for us and cheered. I mean, maybe they didn't understand what we were. But I wanted to ask Vets for Peace if they could encourage more people to march with them on Veterans Day, because look who they're reacting.
Yes. I think you were next.
Yes. Hi, I'm living in Afghanistan, and so that's sort of the framework that I bring to the Syria question, which I'm just starting to learn about. And I guess I wanted to ask you guys how you see the war ending. And as a corollary to that, the 2 things that I'm struggling with and trying to figure out is this question of, though the civil war began as an uprising, and so how do we honor the demands of the public from the early era of the conflict? And then what do we do about the subsequent government-sanctioned violence that we have seen? How do we address those two questions as we envision how the war ends?
You next.
Jan Weinberg, I'm the founder of Show Up America, and I organize the Peace Action Coalition. In terms of messaging for us, for peace movement, anti-war movement, in the near future, the United States military is going to be embroiled in similar police actions, because they're not going to call it war, in the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, and Indonesia, because of what they're calling militants and Islamic fundamental terrorism there, but our military is already deployed there. We're going to have a duplicate of what's going on in the Middle East. If we prepare the public for that information, once those incursions begin, then we're going to have a lot of credibility, because the American public will absolutely flip out that we're going to be at war in the Asia-Pacific region.
Thank you. I think you were next.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, you had something more to share about the funding of those organizations when we were cut off. If that's the case, I'd like to hear details, because it's quite puzzling how local those organizations are in terms of supporting wars, and I'm curious as to what exactly is driving that in terms of material support. And also, in terms of U.S. interests, it seems like, there are many answers, but one of the main ones is profits. The military companies and Halliburton, who goes in to rebuild bridges, to rebuild things that have been destroyed by the military. So profits are driving it. Like I was thinking about that bombing that they did of the Soviet base or Syrian base there. It seemed like it served like a release valve. Everybody was so happy, oh, we bombed, and there were few casualties from what I understand. So I wonder, I know that the inherent problem is imperialism, and as long as we have imperialism, it's not going to end. But in terms of, like, in the short run, in the temporary time span, is it possible to think of ways to rechannel that drive for profits where it causes fewer deaths? Like, for example, give them a target range or something where they can bomb things. They drop a $5 million bomb, and they say we need another $5 million bomb, and nobody dies. That's a cynical view, but I wonder if there is any practical.
I think we have one more here. Was this man here?
Right. Some people on the left here in America, I guess, have asserted or alleged that the West's primary interest, reason for the fanatical interest of the United States, has a lot to do with a proposed hypothetical, maybe it's more than hypothetical, pipeline between Qatar, from Qatar through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, and hypothetically through Syria, and that the hitch there is that Assad will not sign off on the pipeline, the construction of the pipeline. Ergo, get rid of Assad, replacing it with a puppet, signed for rights for the pipeline, and everybody will be happy. I think it ends in Turkey. How much of that is true? Have you ever heard of this? Is this something you can confirm or debunk?
Okay, I would suggest we start with Judy, go down, and keep it very short. If we don't answer all the questions, maybe someone on the panel can take one more shot to answer a question that has been left unanswered.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly say, first of all, I'm going to start with the gentleman at the end, because my memory is getting overwhelmed at this point. And I personally don't buy the pipeline theory, except that I think the pipeline is the cheese in a mousetrap. That the U.S. is buying off Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, and all those countries as our proxies to fight this war against Syria. And it's actually amazing that Syria has actually stood to this. I mean, everyone else has fallen. Assad, and I mean not Assad, Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein and them. They have been unable to. The countries have not had deep enough roots to their governments to survive it. And I think that's one of the reasons why you might say that Assad isn't the point. The point is that the entire Syrian infrastructure of civil society is strong, and which is kind of interesting because in America they'll often say there's no civil society in Syria. But I certainly saw there was, and it's very powerful. Like I say, I think that the pipelines are cheese in a mousetrap. I think that everywhere you go, that the money is moving around, but there'd be money moving around no matter what. It's about power. It's about power. And because money has no value past a certain point, really. It's just weighting the scale in different ways. I'm gonna, I guess, just stick with that one point and hope that people see it as important, and briefly say that the PNAC and the ENOM plan are the same that Bahman was talking about, and that the point isn't that we are succeeding in destroying them. The point is we are also destroying ourselves. And I hate to use the term we. The United States government, empire, is also destroying itself. And these future wars in Asia, I think, are going to be less and less successful because the strength and solidarity of Syria is going to carry on. And these other countries are not going to be so easy to sabotage, at least not all of them. And I'd say Philippines is on the list of ones that's going to hold on and fight. So,
Sarah.
Turn that off. That was I want to go back to sort of where we are on a global scale in this point about the U.S. is losing its grip, and its alliances are also. Now today, there's an Israeli Day parade. We could think back to the time a few decades ago when this was an enormous event. More than 1 million people would turn out. And there was a great deal of identification with Israel and everything that it stood for, and it represented U.S. interests in the region. It has so lost its hold today that they have to fly in like high school bands from around the country with an all-expense-paid weekend to get people to take part in their parade. And the resistance against it, there are all kinds of Palestinian and other youth today who are out there demonstrating. So it's important to sort of see in terms of the very ideas. Now, very important question there, isn't this complete disarray and breakup of so many countries part of the U.S. plan? Yes, it is, but unless it provides a new source of profit, it's a complete failure. And just deciding to be picking through a scrap heap, being rag pickers, is not enough profit to keep the U.S. empire afloat. So they are able to totally destroy countries and pull them apart. But that doesn't mean that they even got the new sources of profit that was part of the aim of the war. Now, selling the weapons, that's profitable. But we really do need to understand that this is an empire in enormous decline, and it's no longer profitable. I mean, the growth rate of less than 1%, that's a big problem for them. So now, just trying to touch on a few things asked about Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and a lot of the alternative media and forces here. The purpose of funding from the Ford Foundation and Soros and Rockefeller and AID funding and whatnot is to provide a social reality, a social construct of where groups all seem to be talking to each other. They have staffs, they're linked into the corporate media, but it really is to support U.S. war and U.S. aims, and to justify. They do the same thing now with even the purpose of what was the United Nations at one time and the way it exists now. So money talks. Is that a surprise? I don't think that it is, but it gives the illusion constantly that this represents civil society, as it's called. And they're able to do this on a vast scale. When they brag that $5 billion and was it 4,000 NGOs were set up in the Ukraine to carry out the coup and the overturn, and they bragged about this. Assistant Secretary of State was on tape saying how well they had done in creating a complete fabrication to overthrow a government, and it was to bring NATO right to the borders of Russia. So this is the way their wars are carried out. And they put a great deal of resources into it. All right. How's it going to end? You know, is sort of the question. Where is all of this going? It's on a deep slide down. It's on a deep slide down. But they're losing their hold also on the population here. The population around the world, you can't just do it with troops, whether it's in the Philippines. Look at this, both the vote in the Philippines and in South Korea, where they were put in whole new THAAD missile batteries, and then they had a real pushback. So they can't carry out, even in the places they thought were totally secure, their aims, and they can't sell it here. Trump is a good example of the complete decay of the two-party system right here and now, and it's losing its hold on the population here. So we need to plan for resistance and know that there are points where things break, and what we're saying can resonate. So let's keep our eye on that.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Really good. Yeah, the U.S. empire is in decline, and it's, like I said, it's not sustainable, and it won't be sustained. A couple of things I wanted to talk about. Thank you for bringing that up about the marches, the Veterans for Peace marches, because it is true that most people want peace. Most people want peace. They may not be educated about it, they may be influenced by other sources, but when they see the veterans marching for peace, yeah, we do get applause, and I would like to encourage more people to march with us. That's good. That's one aspect. The other thing, you spoke about what's going on in the Pacific and Asia. Well, we are talking about that. People are talking about that. Bruce Gagnon from Global Network addresses that a lot. I've spent time in South Korea and Okinawa with people that are very aware of that, and there is a global, I don't want to say network, but there's a global uprising of people all over, and I've seen it in places other than the U.S., where people are standing up to U.S. militarism and U.S. imperialism. You know, so that circle it's important for us to connect with that and realize that we are part of a larger whole. It's not just here in the U.S., but we're part of a global resistance. And that's maybe the only chance we have, you know. But we're aware of the Pacific pivot, and people are resisting it and educating about it. And yeah, that is the next focus. You know, that we will see wars all over the place. And it might help if people are forewarned and forearmed. I don't know what else. What? You can cut into my 2 minutes. I want 2 minutes. Whatever. Go ahead.
I guess everybody covered almost everything. I don't have a, except one suggestion you made, that why don't you give them a bombing field and let them blow up the weapons they have. The problem is that first of all, U.S. interest is not the same as national interests of the United States. When we talk about U.S. interests, you're talking about this ruling class, the empire, and that is being presented as the national interest of the United States people. Okay, these are two separate things. And you cannot shrink it to profit, because that profit needs military support to be guaranteed. Right? If they just blow up their bombs in a field and let all the resistance that's going on around the world to grow, they're going to be losing the whole thing. So you cannot reduce the U.S. imperialism into its military side only. Okay? It is the economic side that supports, backs up the military, because military operation is not a productive but a destructive process, right? So in a sense, they have to draw from the economy. And the strength of the military depends on the strength of the economy. And as Sarah said, it's going down. And at the same time, the resistance is going down, right? So we may have to expect a lot of more desperately violent responses from the United States to various areas of the world.
Thank you.
It's a strategic issue.
So before you leave, if you'd like to get on the Hands Off Syria Coalition email list, come up and put your email here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd like to, because the solution that people are asking for is within you, and we have to come together and we have to discuss these things. There's no silver bullet, but together we're gonna win this.
And there are books and pamphlets here. We appreciate if you maybe